So let's do Belle. Last week, Admiral Santi was on the show, and you were talking to her about Belle, and so people will probably know, but just to sort of fill in a bit of background, essentially, the story, in much the same way as Girl with a Pearl Earring, is a story that is inspired by a painting, which then mixes fact and fantasy. There's a painting which for ages hung in Kermode House, an image of two girls. And Admiral Santi has described it as saying one of them is a biracial woman of colour, one of them is a white woman, and the way in which they're positioned on the painting implies a social equality, which is very, very strange in the 18th century. And the script by Mies Sage basically tells the story of Dido Elizabeth Belle, about whom we know some, but not very much. What we do know is that she was living at Kenwood House under the protection of her great uncle, Lord Mansfield, who also happened to be Lord Chief Justice of the country. And she was there as a companion to her half-cousin, Elizabeth. And they lived in the house together, and she grew up in a situation which was, rather unusual. And whilst this was happening, there were a number of cases going on in which her uncle, played in the movie by Tom Wilkinson, was involved, which essentially laid the groundwork for the beginning of the end of the end of slavery. In the movie, the case which is particularly dealt with is the Zong ship case, which deals with the deliberate drowning of human, in inverted commas, cargo. And that's very much like the arguments in Amistad about people as opposed to objects and property. So what the film does is it takes, what it knows about history, and it takes a very, very serious subject, which is the end of slavery, and then it chooses to build around this a sort of rather fanciful, but I think very, very enjoyable Jane Austen-like story about two girls who are effectively, for the purposes of the narrative, behaving as sisters, both growing up in a society in which there are very strict rules about what they can and can't do, how they must and must not behave, what their prospects are or are not, and, in the end, whether marriage will be something that they must or must not become involved in. Here's a clip from very, very early on with Tom Wilkinson and Emily Watson as the functioning in loco parentis, agreeing to take on Dido into the family home.
Born on English soil.
Indeed. He discovered her mother aboard a captured Spanish slave ship.
So, now we have two nieces in our guardianship.
Elizabeth was in much need of a companion.
And that is what we shall say when questions are asked.
We shall say that in accordance with her birthright, she is entitled to live beneath this roof. That is the nature of order.
And where in that order should her colour be placed? Above or below her Murray bloodline? Marriage?
Impossible. Any match her other origins would attract would surely disgrace her in the family's rank.
And when we are no longer here, no husband, who will take care of her then?
Now, I have to say, from the outset, I really liked Belle. I mean, you saw it before I did, and you said to me, you'd enjoyed it very much, and you'd spoken to the director. And I didn't know whether I was going to, but I thought it was really terrific. And the reasons are fairly simple. I think that what it does really cleverly is to take an important heart of a story which is about something very, very sort of serious, which is on the one hand to do with the abolition of slavery, the overturning of slavery eventually, but it's also to do with gender equality. It's also to do with class. It's to do with where people fit in any social system. I mean, there's a line in the movie which is we are but their property, and that refers both in terms of women and men and slaves and slave owners. I mean, it's sort of opened out all the time, and what Admiral Santi has done here, I think, is to take the sort of the nub of this and to open it out to the widest possible, broadest multiplex audience. So it dresses this up in the costumery of a sort of of a costume period drama. It has an awful lot of that kind of the sense of the kind of Jane Austen movies that we've seen, many of which are very good, and it's very very particularly concerned with social nicety and social place. So, for example, at one moment there's a central idea that Dido she's too grand to eat with the servants, but she's not able to eat with her family. So she's kind of caught between between stares. And this is a very sort of, Austen idea about where does somebody fit, because they're a person out of time, a person out of place, a person for whom, the sort of strange machinations of social life have put them in an apparently impossible position. It's also a really lively and vibrant movie to watch. I mean, I think the performances are absolutely terrific. It's one of those things in which, you want to watch these characters. You want to know what's going to happen to them. You want to know, whether, how things are going to work out for them. And although some people have been sort of a little bit sniffy and said, well, actually what it does is it's too soft. There was one review that said, after 12 Years a Slave, is it possible to make a movie which has got this kind of saccharine edge to it, which is dealing with something like slavery? And I think it absolutely is, because, in fact, what it is it's a romantic melodrama. It's an involving romantic melodrama with a really, really sort of solid underpinning of an important story that works because on an absolutely personal level, you care about the characters and you care about the ideas. I mean, this whole central idea that her uncle is this, Lord Chief Justice, is dealing with these very complicated issues of slavery. And, of course, as you were saying yesterday, how remarkable that part of the story actually turns out to be true, that he's ruling on cases. But what's important to him is that everything is done right and by the law. And this is how he sort of arranges his house around this strange prospect of having Dido living with them. He said, well, there are ways in which it can work. For when we're eating in company, then it's not acceptable. When we're eating in company, then it is acceptable. And everything sort of seems to be planned out of that. And the question that the film asks is, what influence, if any, does the Dido Elizabeth Belle character have on the rulings that he then makes? And of course, one can, this is all fanciful, this is all to do with, invention, this is narrative invention, but it's narrative invention that works really well. You do look at the story and think, actually, I believe in those characters, even though I know that there's a huge amount of confectionery going on here. I don't care. And the reason I don't care is because the characters themselves are well written and they're well played, and they are essentially people that, as I said, that you end up caring about. I think Gugu Mbatha-Raw is terrific in the central role because it's such a complicated role. And it's, she has to be very nuanced. She has to be so many things, so many different things. And it's all to do with somebody finding their identity. And if you're playing a role, I mean, actually, presumably the thing that you want more than anything is a certainty about who your identity is. But what you see when you're watching the film is her finding her identity. Tom Wilkinson is terrific as Lord Mansfield, who you do believe has, gravitas and weight and heft, and yet is also, in a strange way, sort of, he wants to change, but he also doesn't want to frighten the horses. And there's a speech which is obviously fanciful in which his wife says to him, you used to be an idealist. You used to talk about if something was wrong, you'd invented New York. What happened to that? But the central thing is that actually he wants to maintain order. All the time, characters are telling him, what you're ruling on these cases that are coming up. The whole of the economic stability of the country is absolutely based on this. And he doesn't want to frighten the horses. He doesn't want to cause radical change, although he is himself, in a strange way, a radical thinker. You then have the sort of the romantic intrigues as well. I mean, this is very kind of Austen. There's one character who looks like they're the right person. Maybe they're, but you can see the minute they walk on, they hear this character is untrustworthy. This other character over here who is a clergyman's son, who is idealistic.
I love the way they look down on the clergy, the aristocracy.
Yeah, no, that's the worst. What do you do? Oh, a clergyman's son. And didn't you think instantly Sam Reed had something of the of a young Christopher Reeve?
Yes.
I mean, it was that same kind of square George.
And George of the Jungle. A little bit of him.
Watch out for that tree.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was the production design was terrific. It was ravishing to look at. I thought it was a really good piece of writing. As I said, the script is Mr. Sagai, but also I think that Amanda Sunday had some input into it as well. And I think the story is well told. I think it does a lovely mixture of fact and fantasy to tell a serious story, but to dress it in the cinema of pleasure, the cinema of of romance, and I thought it was vibrant and intelligent, and I cried, and I came out afterwards. And here's the funny thing: I came out afterwards, and I had a good old cry, which was great.
Pathetic.
And somebody else came out, another film critic, I won't say who, and had exactly the same response. And then a third film critic came out and went, "Well, that was awfully cheesy, wasn't it?" And blah 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 blah. And it was like there was a complete division down the middle, which was that you either went with this or you didn't. Well, I did.